Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph will begin Nun Ches Amud Beis, the Mishnah at the bottom. So the Mishnah Ein Moededin Ela Min HaMumcha. You don't measure the tchum of the city; it has to be measured through an expert, a mumcha, an expert surveyor. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisus brings a pshat that it means it's not talking about the person measuring; it's talking about the terrain, the land that it's measured on. It has to be on a flat surface. You choose the flat surface surrounding the city, that's where you measure it on. You don't measure only through Rashi Pshat, through an expert surveyor. Let's say it was measured, you measure on two sides of the city. So measured on one end and on the other end. Now, let's say at one end it extended further, the other end it extended not as far. So you have this discrepancy. On one end it's here, on the other end you draw the line here or here. So the Mishnah says that we follow the one which is the longer line. We take the longer line, not the shorter line. We take the we shemim l'malkim shariba, and the Mishnah continues riba le'echad mid le'echad shemim l'maruba, which seems to be repetitious. The Gemara is going to ask and explain what this next line means. So we follow the longer line. The way the Rishonim speak this out and explain this is that we don't attribute this to a surveyor that's negligent. We don't attribute it to pure negligence. We say that one line is longer and the other is shorter because the line, the rope, was pulled tighter or stretched longer on one side than it was on the other one. So that could account for the discrepancy. On one end, the surveyors, they pulled the rope, they pulled it much tighter and they stretched it, and that's why there's a discrepancy in the line. So we follow the longer one. We say the shorter one was not pulled as tight, it wasn't stretched, it was sagging, and therefore it didn't extend that far. The Gemara will explain another source of the discrepancy and why there could be another source of discrepancy, and we'll see in the Gemara. But in any event, as we'll see in the Gemara, it doesn't mean that if the discrepancy is completely out, if the discrepancy is huge, then we see clearly that there's a mistake, that there's negligence, and then we don't rely on it. So we attribute this discrepancy to something which was either in the form of measuring, that they pulled the string, the ropes tighter, or they had it looser, or they had more slack, or, as we'll see, another form of discrepancy in the Gemara. And you can even rely on an Eved or a Shivcha who are normally not kosher leidus, they're posel leidus, but for this you can rely on them to say, up and here is Tchum Shabbos. What do they mean? How do they know that this is where the Tchum Shabbos is? The Miri speaks out that they say that they saw the surveyor measuring it to this point. Or, as the Bir Halacha says, that they saw people in the past walking up until this point. You can rely even on an Evet or a Shivcha. Taisus on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, Taisus has two pshatim. When we say we rely on an Evet or a Shivcha, does that mean we rely on them alone? Or we rely on them with another aid which is kosher? Meaning, to be made on the tchum, where the tchum reaches, do you need two eidim? Or even one aid suffices. If you need two eidim, so what it means over here is that one of the two can be an Eved or Shivcha. If you only need one aid, then it's saying that even that one aid could be an Eved or Shivcha. So even an Eved or Shivcha in the modern Lemar kan tchum Shabbos lo yomer chacham is a davar lahachmer ela lahakil, because when the chachamim said this halacha of tchumim, it's a din d'Rabbanan. They made the din d'Rabbanan, but they made kulas in it. And since it's a Rabbanan, we're mekel, and we say kulas in it, and therefore we allow you to be soimech on the longer measurement, not the shorter one. We allow you to rely on the edus of an Eved and a Shivcha as well. The Ritva speaks out is that even though we say a derabanan, a din derabanan, we say safek derabanan lakula, but something that's efshel levrure, you have to be mevaret. So something that you can determine, and find out what the reality is. Normally speaking, we don't say safek derabanan lakula. If you can measure something, if you can determine what the mitzias is, what the reality is, we don't say arbitrarily safek derabanan lakula or mekel. If you can determine what the mitzias is, you have to determine it. Over here is the chiddush over here that even though it can be determined, it can be remeasured, we still allow you to rely on the longer measurement because it's very difficult over here. There's a big tircha. So over here we say, even though it's efshel levrura, over here we say that Layomro chachamim v'hachmer ela lahakel, that you can be mekel and rely on the longer measurement. Zok the Gemara, l'malkim shari be'in, l'malkim shemiat loy. It's mashma that you rely on the longer measurement. And it's mashma you only rely on the longer one, but not on the shorter one. Which means that on the side of the town that's shorter, you would disregard that measurement completely, and you can't even walk until the line of the shorter measurement. It's mashma that we rely on the longer measurement for this side of the town, and on this side of the town we disregard the shorter measurement. So does that mean l'malkim shariba in l'malkim shemiyat loy, that in the other side of the town where the measurement is shorter, you can't rely on that at all? If you can rely on one side of the town on a longer measurement, how could it be that on the other side of the town you can't even rely on the shorter measurement? Ema af l'malkim shariba. What it means is that you can rely even on the longer measurement. Certainly you can walk until the area of the line of the shorter measurement, but even to the longer measurement you can walk to there as well. Riba lechad miyat lechad. So the Mishnah continues, says riba lechad miyat lechad, which would seem to be the exact same halacha as the ratio of the Mishnah. So hasu lamali ainu hach. Isn't that exactly what we just said? The Gemara says no. Hachikoma riba echad miyat echad. It means what it says over here. If they had two different surveyors, the ratio is talking a case where you had one surveyor, he measured one line, extended further, and the other side it didn't extend as far. Over here there's two different surveyors, one showed the marking to be further and one shorter. So Shemim L'Zeh, we can rely on the surveyor that extended the line further. So that's what this halach is talking about. If there's two different surveyors, you can rely on the one that extended it further. The discrepancy can't be greater than the measurement of the tchum on an alachsan. It can't exceed the measure of the city as defined by the alachsan, the diagonal. Now what does this mean? As we mentioned before, if there's negligence, we can't rely on the surveyors. When we say that there's a discrepancy, we attribute it to either the pulling of the rope. Now, if the discrepancy is larger, what is the maximum amount where we can attribute it to either some error, reasonable error, or a different method of measuring or pulling of the rope, which isn't negligence. The maximum amount is that we can attribute to is the diagonal of the tchum. What does that mean? When you measure the alpayim amma, you measure from the city, you measure alpayim amma, you measure 2,000 ammas in a straight line in each direction. So you measure 2,000 ammas, and then you draw the square. Now, the difference, the 2,000 ammas is in a straight line. On a diagonal, it's roughly 40% larger. So it's 2,000 ammas in a straight line, it's roughly 2,800 ammas on a diagonal. Now, if there is a discrepancy of roughly 585 ammas, then we can say perhaps what the surveyor did is, instead of measuring the 2,000 ammas in a straight line, he measured the 2,000 ammas on the alachsan, on the diagonal. And therefore the straight line is roughly 40% less, and that's why he has the instead of 2,000 amas on a straight line, it was 1,415 amas in a straight line. Because instead of measuring 2,000 amas on a straight line, he measured on the diagonal, which means on the straight line, it's roughly 40% less. So instead of 2,000 amas on a straight line, it's 1,415 amas on a straight line. So perhaps, therefore, one surveyor had 2,000 amas, and the other one only 1,450. But more than that, we would attribute to negligence, and you can't rely on it. The Chachamim said Tchumim, they weren't machmer, they're only mekel. We learned the Brisa says that they were machmer by Tchumim. From the Gemara Maravina, loy lahakal divrei Torah, el lahachmer al divrei Torah. Utchumim the Rabbanon. What it means is that the etzem institution, the takana of Tchum is a chumrah. Midaraisa, you can walk beyond 2,000 amas. There's no issur walking beyond 2,000 amas. This institution of Tchum is a chumrah, but within the takana of Tchumim, they were mekel. And if you have these types of sfeikas, they were mekel because it is a din d'Rabbanan. So that's how we resolve it. The next Mishnah is talking about a different topic. We're not talking about the surveying and the measuring of the Tchumim. We're talking about shitufei mevuos. A chatzer, different houses open into a courtyard in the chatzer, they need an erev chatzeres. The chatzer is open to a mavoi. That needs shituf mevuos. In a city, the different mevuos, the different streets, can be ma'arav together with a shituf mevuos, and they can combine the city together. And therefore, you can carry from one mavoi to another mavoi. But there are certain restrictions and halachas that are associated with it. So in the Mishnah here, we're going to talk about, and in the Gemara coming up, we're going to talk about how you can be ma'arav a city, how you can join the city together in a shituf mevuos. Zok the Mishnah, Ir shel Yachiv v'nasa shel Rabim, if the city of the town originally was private. It was a small town. It didn't have 600,000. And now it became an Ir shel Rabim. You can be Marvin Eskula. You can join the entire town in with one shituf mevuos, as long as you make the proper takonas, because you make the proper takonas that are necessary. It's because it is now an Ir shel Rabim. But if you make the proper takonas, then you can join it all together in a shituf. You don't have to make a separate takana between each mavoi that opens into another city, into another street rather. You don't have to make takanas between one mavoi and another. And you don't have to exclude a certain part of the city that's not joined in the shituf, that's not joined in this erev together. You can be ma'arav the whole city together. You don't need adjustments from one mavoi to another. And you don't have to exclude any part of the city. So that's if it's an Ir shel Yachiv not shel Rabim, even though right now it's shel Rabim, but we're not concerned that people will think, they see people carrying in the city, they'll think that you can carry in Rishus Rabim, because they know that this was an Ir shel Yachiv. It still has that characteristic of it. It still has that identity. But however, shel Rabim and also shel Yachid. But if it was a Rabim, now an Ir shel Rabim, even though now it's shel Yachid, ein Marvin is cool. You can't join it all together in one erev, because we're afraid that if people see you carrying in the city, they'll think you can carry in Rishus Rabim. Unless you exclude part of it is excluded, and the minimum size that it's excluded is like we see the city called Chadasha that was in the region of Yehuda that had 50 residents. You have to exclude a block that has at least 50 residents from the air, so that people will know that this is you can carry here because it's not a Rishus Rabim. So that's what Divrei Rav Yehuda. That's what Rav Yehuda said. That's how much you have to exclude. Rav Shimon Aimer, you don't have to exclude that large a block. It's enough to exclude Gimel Chatzeres Shel Shnei Batim, that 3 Chatzeres that have 2 houses in each. That's enough to exclude. And Tosfos speaks out that When you exclude it, though, you do need also a tzuras HaPesach to separate it from the rest of the city. So this is the gzeira that we make over here, that if it's a public city, even though now it's private, you have to exclude part of the city from the shituf, from this eruv. What's an example of a private city that became a public one? It's this city called Diskarta, which belonged to the Reish Galusa. It belongs to the Reish Galusa and now became a public city. Why did you choose that example? Because if you say because the government is there and therefore people come and go because they have to get certain permission from the government, or they have certain authority from the government, etc. So, and therefore, since there are people going back and forth, mitkir adori, that they will remind the people about the halachas of Shabbos, and they'll know that the only reason you can carry is because this was initially a private town. And that's why the shituv helps for the whole town. Well, if that's the case, Kol Yisrael Nami, why you pick this town, any town? There's always people coming and going, but for the Shabbos, on Shabbos morning, they come to hear the drasha, and people are going back and forth, and they'll remind each other. Elamar Rav Nachman, he says it's not that restrictive. Kigoyin Diskarta de Nizui. He says like that town of Nizui, which was a typical private town that became a public town. Ton Rabbanon, Ir Shel Yochiv and Nasa Shel Rabim, Urshus Rabim Averes B'Seicha. If it's Shel Yochiv, now it became Rabim, and the Urshus Rabim passes through it. Keitzin Ma'arvin Oisa. How are we Ma'arvit? How do we make the Eruv? Oisen Lech Mikan, Velech Mikan. We make a Lechi at each end. Then we make a Lechi at each end where the street comes into the town. At each end where it opens into the town. Or on each end of it. And then you can carry within the town. The Gemara will explain according to who this works and why this works. We'll see shortly. And you can't make an Eruv half and split it in half. You can't make the Eruv the half part of the town in one Eruv and part in another. Or either it's the entire town that's in one Eruv, or each mavi separately. The Gemara will discuss this in greater detail. But if it was Rab and it's still Shel Rabin, and it has only one entranceway, so it only enters on one end, Ma'arvin is Kula, then you can be Ma'arv the whole town, because it's not considered to be a Rishus Harabim, and therefore over here you don't have to exclude a portion of it. Over here, you don't have to exclude a portion of it because since it's only an open on one end, it's not considered to be a Rishus Harabim. So, and as Rashi explains, even though there are 600,000 people over here, but since it's only open at one end, it doesn't resemble a Rishus Harabim. This takana that you have to exclude a portion of the town doesn't apply over here. So now it says that if it opens on both ends, you can be masakin, you put a lechi on each end or a koira on each end. So Mantana the Me'av Rishus Harabim, well, there's a Rishus Harabim passing through the town, and you can be ma'ar of it. So who's the Tana that holds you can be ma'ar of it, to make an Eruv in such a case? Amar Rav Huna B'Rei Rishu Rabbi Yehudi is Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda holds, as we mentioned before, that he holds that shtei mechitzas are deraisa. If you have two mechitzas, that's enough to make a Rishus HaYachid. Now, the other Tanoim disagree with that. The Chachamim argue on that, and they hold no. It has to be more than two. So it's the Machlekes Rishonim doesn't need to be 3 or 4 midoraisa, but it has to be more than 2. So they hold, the Chum hold, that you can't make an Eruv if the Rishus Harabim passes through the town and it's open on both ends. A lechi on both ends is not enough, or a kar on both is not enough. You have to close it off. You need a tzuras HaPesach. But who's the Tana that holds that a lechi or kar would be enough? That's Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda holds that 2 mechitzas are the raisa. Because as we see from the following, Yasser al Kein Amar Rav Yehuda, he said even more than that, Mishiyesh L'Shnei Bat. If he has two houses, Mishneh Tzidei Rishus Rabim on two sides of the street, Oisalech Mikan, Agalech Mikan, Aikar Mikan, Vakar Mikan, V'Naisun Bams. So he holds if you have houses on two sides of the street, so the street passes through the middle of them. Let's look at it this way, it's easier. You have a house here and a house here, the street passes through. So you have an opening here, an opening here, you make a lechi here, a lechi here, or a kar here and a kar there, or a kar here rather than a kar here. So you make a lechi or a kaira on each side where there's open and the street passes through, because he holds that this two walls are deraisa, and therefore a minimal takana is enough. And they can carry in nice and maps. You can carry in the middle. Amr loy, they said, the Chum say you can't make an Eruv like this because this is a Rishus Harabim. It's not a Rishus Hayachid. It's a Rishus Harabim and Minatayra. So you minimal takana with a Lechi or Kaira is not sufficient. Now this Tana is going like Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore he says if the Rishus Harabim passes through the town, you make a Lechi on each end or a Kaira on each end, and you can be ma'ar of the whole town together.